Queensland is 20 times bigger than South Carolina. Introduction to Queensland is really an introduction to our first panel member, Peter Beattie. Peter served as Premier of Queensland, Australia from 1998 to 2007. And the thing I like about his bio, he proudly claims that he was never defeated, which is a good thing for a politician to be able to say. He developed the Smart State Plan. He holds an honorary doctorate of laws from USC, which I find a little bit humorous now that he works for Clemson in economic development. Jochen Lauterbach. Jochen's my neighbor on the end of the table here. Jochen is a professor endowed chair of chemical engineering at USC. That chair is sponsored by Santee Cooper and the electric cooperatives. He studied under the Nobel Prize winner Gerhard Ertl, and he holds a patent in nitrogen oxide storage catalyst containing cobalt. Is that part of a Toyota? Is that right? Prius. Last panel member, Bobby Hitt, and you'll recognize Bobby. Bobby's been around for a while. Bobby was appointed Secretary of Commerce in 2010 by our Governor Haley. Managed corporate affairs for BMW from 93 to 2010. Prior to that, served as the managing editor of the state paper. We've got 3 questions I'd like to address today with the panel members and reserve lots of time for them to address these questions. The first is, what are the keys to developing sustainable industries in South Carolina? And I'll ask the panel members to define what they would call sustainable industries as we go through each. Bobby, I'd like to start with you. As you've worked with both a private industry with BMW and now as the Secretary of Commerce, what is a sustainable industry and how do we develop them in South Carolina?
Thanks, Mike. Is this working? I don't know if I need a microphone, but I'll try it anyway. Okay. Good morning. I'm glad to be here back in Charleston. I'm a native Charlestonian, so those of you that don't like the heat, it's too bad. I've had to live in Columbia for an awful lot of years, so I appreciate the heat down here. It's very nice. At any rate, what is sustainable industry in South Carolina? Primarily, it's manufacturing. It's one of the things we're best known for. It's one of the things we're best at in South Carolina. It's one of the things that Smart State is designed to support. It's one of the things that all the research universities are focused on. And let me give you an idea how sort of well we do it, but how much better we can be at it with the help of all the utilities in South Carolina. The economic output of the manufacturing industry in South Carolina last year was over $27 billion, making up a little less than 17% of our overall state's economy. South Carolina is clearly dependent on a manufacturing industry. To give you some idea, the U.S. economy is only 12% based in manufacturing. So as you can see, we have a substantially larger dependence on it. Manufacturing is sustainable. Investments in the ground, it stays. It's unlike retail, unlike other service industries that can move. And I see manufacturing as key to our success. I also see military installations as key to our success, by the way. They stay for a long time, too. If we treat them well, they stay hopefully forever. Now, as Mike mentioned, I was with BMW. I was with them from the time we started until I retired from BMW at the end of January to take this job. BMW is a good case study, I think. When BMW came here in 1992, was announced, 93 it was built, 94 it started production. In that time, we've recruited over 40 companies to South Carolina to support BMW. The growth of the automobile manufacturing industry in South Carolina has grown from less than 20,000 people in 1993 to over 90,000 people today. And auto suppliers are now in 37 of the 46 counties. So this gives you an idea of what a sustainable manufacturing base can be like when you land the right type of company and you then work very hard to satisfy its needs. This is exactly what we're doing today with Boeing. Last 2 weeks ago, I was in Europe with the governor and the rest of my team and the regional alliances. We talked to many of Boeing's potential suppliers. I hope we'll have an announcement pretty soon in one that's coming here. We think South Carolina is in the right place. There are aviation OEMs in Georgia and in North Carolina, and then, of course, Boeing here. We believe we're very properly placed for that. And this is not just high-density market development. This is also rural development. Many of these plants will need more space than you will find in terms of cost structures in the high-density areas. This is not just a development for the low country in, say, Charleston County and the contiguous counties. In fact, I think you'll see that with the announcement that will come, I hope, in the weeks ahead. South Carolina, the development of OEMs and their tier structures is a key to our success in the long run because there's a huge investment structure built with it. BMW, as an example, is now $5 billion in the ground. $5 billion. Plant operates, it's about $1 billion an hour worth of payroll, $1 billion an hour with operating cost and about $1 million a day in payroll. This impact is just huge. I'm very excited about all that I see going on in manufacturing in the state. I hope to make an announcement pretty soon in a nice rural county that is supported by a co-op of a medium-sized manufacturing plant in a small South Carolina town. This is great excitement for my staff and I because we know when we can put a plant in a small town that employs 200 people, we can change that town. It remarkably will change a town. 200 people in a manufacturing plant is huge, and we'll make an announcement about that pretty soon. So sustainable investment is manufacturing. I think that's the key to it, and that's what we're working on very hard here in South Carolina.
Thanks, Bobby. And we'll come back in just a moment to you and get some reaction to others. Peter, Queensland, when you first took over as the Premier, what was the state of the economy in Queensland? What were folks doing for a living, and how did it change?
It was basically, Mike, a rocks and crops economy. That is, it did mining and agriculture. We introduced a strategy, as you've already said, called Smart State, because we realised three things. And being in Asia, it was more obvious to us. One, China was going to change the world, which it will and is, and that covers everything from energy through to education. Secondly, the energy mix is going to change, and because we're one of the biggest exporters, the biggest exporter of coal in the world, we knew that with alternative energies developing, and they are, that coal would be under threat. So we had to clean it up, and that's why we started to spend money on sequestration, clean coal technologies, so that we could try and export them to China. And I might just, as an aside, say that if anyone thinks that coal is not going to be part of the energy mix for the next 30 or 40 years, then they're on an illegal substance, because it will be. And the issue is to clean it up. Having said that, what we see and saw, Mike, in China is that they're spending a lot of money on alternative energies. And we can't just simply pretend that they're over there. They will sell those technologies to the world. And you have to remember this, and my wife and I are now US residents, so we love this country. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. But the reality is, in another 16 years, the Chinese economy, if it continues to go the way it is, will be bigger than the US economy. The US's traditional advantage has been innovation, smart research, value-adding, strengths in education. Now, that's what the Chinese are doing. The only way, in my humble view, that the US will compete long-term against the Chinese, and then the Indians, don't forget, the projections are the Indians will have an economy bigger than the US in 2043. The only way the US will compete is by continuing to innovate and to do the sort of things that Bobby said before. And we've got to remember that when you bring in industries, you've got to lock them in, like BMW. Remember the Irish? I went to Ireland when we were developing Smart State, and the Irish brought a lot of multinationals in, service industries, but they didn't lock them in. They didn't put plant in the ground, and they didn't put money into research institutions and into universities. So what happened when the global financial crisis came? They left, and Ireland ended up in a heap. And I could see even then, and I'm not trying to say I was smart, I had good people around me, that Ireland was not going to work long term when they got into trouble. But let me come back to the point, and I'll conclude on this because you're going to have a lot of more intelligent things to say than me. One of the things we realised, if we were going to compete with the Chinese, we had to spend a lot of money on education. It is just fundamentally important. And I know people can argue about this. I'm not silly. I live here now. I see the debates. If people don't argue against education and investing in education, and if they argue against spending money on research in institutions like the universities, you are denying the young people of America their future. The Chinese are not doing it. They are spending a fortune on education and research. And if we don't respond in that same way, then I'm sad to say to you, we will be left behind. That's black and white. There's no ifs or buts about it. That's what will happen. A bit later on, you'll see some statistics about what innovation and the investment that Smart State did. Who's heard of a vaccine called Gardasil to prevent cervical cancer in women? It's manufactured in this country by Merck, developed by a Brisbane scientist from Queensland, sold to the world. You've heard Bobby talked about Boeing. Boeing also has their regional headquarters in Brisbane. Boeing, University of Queensland are doing amazing research in biofuels, and the US Navy from 2012 domestically will have 50% of its fleet green fleet. 2016 internationally will be a green fleet that goes to the world. 50% of the fuel for the aircraft and the ships in the US Navy will be from Carmelina, which is a plant presently grown in Montana, but it'll all be about biofuels, about making the US energy self-sufficient. Australia, through what's happening in Queensland, will be one of the suppliers to the US Navy. That's where the jobs are going to be. That's what innovation means, but you've got to invest in it, and you've got to invest in your schools and your education, otherwise it won't work.
How did you sell that, Peter, when you were in Queensland? I mean, that's a tough sell in the United States right now.
Absolutely tough sell. And we use mum power, to be honest with you, because a lot of people thought that I'd lost my senses initially. They didn't quite understand it until we got Richard Branson to bring his Virgin Airlines to Brisbane and put the headquarters there, and we did big things with Boeing, and Gardasil was developed. What we basically said to mums is, if you want to have one of your children to have jobs in the future, as China and India, and just don't forget, they're just up the road from us, as they expand, if you want them to be other than simply a beach or working with low-income jobs, you've actually got a value add. So we went to mums and said, the way this works is simple. If a university, if Jochen here develops and commercialises something out of the university, you've got to build a building. So you need plumbers, you need builders, you need painters, you need lawyers, IP lawyers, to look after your IP. So in essence, what we did was say to mums, if you want your children to actually have a future, and grandmothers were the same, let me tell you, that power, mum power, it changed how people thought about it. But for a long time, people didn't get it, but now they get it. And it's now bipartisan, I should say. Both sides of politics support it.
Sounds like a good goal for South Carolina. Jochen, you just got back from home, Germany.
Yes, I did.
How was it?
It was very good, and I saw a lot of changes actually in Germany, and I'd like to speak a little bit about this because I come from a region in northern Bavaria that's very similar to South Carolina. We had a strong manufacturing base, mainly in porcelain and textiles, that all evaporated in the 60s and the 70s. Very high unemployment rate. The highest rates were around 15% unemployment. A lot of young people left, and sort of the retired people stayed behind, trying to struggle to make it, the daily pay the daily food bill. And the government, very similar to what you saw in Queensland, about 15, 20 years ago, made a decision to put money into education. They decided that they needed a new university, and they started building a brand new university from scratch that has now over 15,000 students. And they connected that university with research. And so it was not just student education, but it was research. And if I can make you look at that slide, I do apologize, it's in German, but this is something I just copied out of my local hometown newspaper last week when I was at home in my parents' house. It says energy instead of porcelain. And that's the direction they're going. They have multiple startups that look into biofuels, wind energy, solar energy, clean coal, the entire mix. And they're very well connected to the local university. There's a lot of people that do cutting-edge research to bring in a lot of research funds, not only from the government, but also from private investors. They just opened a Fraunhofer Institute, which is similar to a national research laboratory in that area that's supposed to have about 2,500 jobs and that has already started 2 new startup companies. And they're starting to manufacture windmills in my hometown. And if you look at the unemployment rate, that, as I said, was around 15% typically, even when I grew up as a kid, there in the late 70s, early 80s, where everything else was booming, our unemployment rate was going up. And if you look at the numbers now, they're around 4.5%. And they can't get enough educated people into the region. And they actually have a positive influx now of people coming into the region. And I think this is what Peter and Bobby said, that if you invest in education, and if you connect the education with the manufacturing, and if you connect the innovation with manufacturing, in the long term, you will win. And I think this is what we really need to do to be able to compete in 21st century. And if I come back to, again, what Peter said, when I go to China and visit colleagues, we have collaborations with China, with Russia, with Germany, with Australia. We have, the academic field is an international field. If I go to China and if I look at the investments that China is doing in science, in basic research, we are falling so behind in this country at this moment. The same in Germany. They're putting up 50, 60 million euro buildings for fundamental research. Technical University of Munich just put up a $60 million building for biofuels research. And it's connected with BMW, actually. And they expect this to pay off in the long term. And this long-term thinking, this long-term vision, connecting innovation with manufacturing, I think it's the only path forward for the state of South Carolina.
In 1900, Bobby, if you had asked folks who the greatest military power was, who was the center of global finance, who had the strongest presence worldwide, it would have been Great Britain. And 100 years later, they're still trying to resurrect themselves. What do we do in South Carolina? We're not a nation. We're part of a nation. But what do we do to make sure that we can compete globally for investment? You work for BMW. Why in the world would BMW come to South Carolina? We have affordable energy. We have great cooperatives. But what beyond that brought BMW here? What will bring other international investment to South Carolina, particularly our rural communities?
I love to tell a story. When I first started with BMW, I was in Germany talking to someone in our planning department. As Jochen knows, in the German business world, planning department's a very important department in a major company. And I asked him why, at the end of the day, did we pick South Carolina? And first response was, well, you have the logistics and the transportation. I said, yeah, I know, I wrote all that. Tell me at the end of the day why we really picked South Carolina. And the guy looked at me and said, well, you have the 2 most essential ingredients for car manufacturing in South Carolina. Well, being a bit of a class clown, which is not a quickly recognized trait in Germany, by the way, I said, well, wow, it's eluded us for 100 years. Please help me understand what those features are. And he said, well, number one, because of your technical education system, you have the ability to develop skills in people now. My German colleagues judge South Carolina's technical education system amongst the best in the United States. And I will tell you, having worked with a German company for almost 20 years, that means a lot. Very thorough examination of very painstaking, sometimes very detailed examination. And they judge South Carolina to be amongst the best, which we are, which talks about the quality, the potential quality of our workforce and how it can be done. The other thing they told me, and for all of us who live in rural areas, and I live in Fairfield County these days, said we rode around and looked at how people lived in the neighborhoods. Well, when he said that, of course, I immediately thought of the less than finer neighborhoods in South Carolina, like most of us do. But what he meant was he rode around in the middle-class neighborhoods and saw how people kept their homes and their yards and their cars and realized that we were a very prideful people. And if you mix skill and pride, you get a craftsman, is what he told me. And that was one of the underlying bases on why South Carolina was chosen. The other primary site at the time was Omaha, and it wasn't very close to the Atlantic Ocean, so I think we had a bit of an edge there. But one of the things that is really key for South Carolina is the quality of our workforce and the ability for us to train people quickly to be able to apply those skills and to maintain that level of training for our folks. It gives us a great advantage. I can't emphasize how much that is. I also think that what's going on with Smart State in South Carolina, and I too was a part of that with Mike for a while. He made me resign from that when I took this job. But I can't tell you how much I think the intersection of education in the workplace is for us. Recently, when I was in Germany, I had the governor with me, and I intentionally went into plants that had very, very high-order, complex manufacturing in it. This is high-end machining with very, very tight tolerances. It's the type of manufacturing we have not traditionally had in South Carolina. It requires a very high-end craft skill as well as a very high-end engineering capability within a company in order to do this. We have just recently landed such a company known as ZF, or as the Europeans would say, ZF, which is in Lawrence County. It will change Lawrence County. It will change South Carolina. The level of manufacturing complexity in an 8- and 9-speed automatic transmission being built here is on a level of complexity unlike anything we have seen in South Carolina. This tells me that we have the aptitude to do it. We need more effort. Recently, my office has endowed a chair for ZF. We got to find out how to pay for it, like most things in South Carolina. But the ability of us to network with these companies in order to bring the engineering research that's necessary to take these companies further and further will take our folks to higher and higher levels. And this gives us an advantage. We can tell the world that we have this type of manufacturing, Boeing, BMW, ZF, and the world will listen. And interestingly enough, we are in some ways better known overseas for some of our prowess than we are here in our own country. It's interesting that when I'm in Germany, I have this huge sense of there's a great knowledge of South Carolina. They don't confuse us with North Carolina either. They're one of the few places that doesn't. They know who we are. So I think our workforce is key for us, and our ability to educate our workforce and continue to work on improving it. I would also say, because of my background, I've spent a lot of time when I was in journalism looking at education. I have finally come to the conclusion after almost 40 years, there's only one way to do it, and that's through the higher ed side and the technical education side. I am convinced we just need to grab it by the hair and pull it until it gets better. And I think that's what we're doing with the research universities and what we're doing with the technical schools. And if we continue to do that, we will have greater success in higher order manufacturing and higher order jobs.
Let's go back and pull up Peter's statistics, Van, if we can. I want to give Peter a chance to brag about what he was able to accomplish in Queensland. It was in answer to the first question right before Jochen's articles, I believe. This is what you get out of hard work, isn't it, Peter?
It does. Thank you, Mike. What it basically shows is this is the level of, these are the outcomes from the investments that we made. Knowledge-intensive exports grew by 105%. This is the years that I was governor, which was almost 10 years. The life sciences sector employs, this is at 2008, 19,731 people, and 68% of those were in the private industry, which is really what we wanted to do. People who were supporting this in the community didn't want people wandering around in white lab coats doing research that went nowhere. They wanted the commercialisation of brain power, the sort of things that Jochen does.
And you were part of the Labour Party, is that right?
Yeah, we would be concerned, we would be equivalent of conservative Democrats in American terminology. Queensland is culturally very similar to South Carolina. If you went there, there's a Democratic governor. My deputy, who I retired after 10 years because I got sick of politics, my deputy's now the governor. So you would, and the people are very similar, very friendly. You wouldn't meet nicer people outside of South Carolina unless you went to Queensland.
Or Bavaria.
Or Bavaria. Okay. And if you have a look at the salaries, there was over $1 billion expended on salaries in Queensland, and that'll give you some idea. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll just quickly go through these. Average salary of employees who were higher than the general average in these jobs, which showed that these were well-paid jobs. The estimated total income for the year 2009 from life sciences only, that's like developing Gardasil and health outcomes, was almost $5 billion. Now forget about the aviation industry that we worked on, Boeing and Virgin, almost $5 billion.
And reminding folks here, this is the equivalent of a state in Australia. This is not a nation.
But this is the same as South Carolina.
Same as South Carolina.
Yeah. So, and finally, if we can go on to the other quick slide, this is what R&D, and there's 143 complete patent applicants were filed or granted in 2009. Mike, can I just say two quick other things? I couldn't do better than what Bobby did, of course, about what's happening in South Carolina, and I'm not just trying to be polite. I totally agree with what Bobby said. Let me just mention two other things and tell you a story. In 1999, when I was governor, my wife Heather and I hosted President Jiang Zemin of China on the reef. And we had the whole day with him because he'd been to see our national government. He wanted a day on the reef, and for some reason all the federal politicians disappeared and we ended up with him, which was a pleasant day. He could speak English, he spoke Russian, and I think he spoke Romanian. But anyway, his English was good enough. We had a day where we had to talk all day with the President of China, which was an extraordinary experience. The thing that it left indelibly in my mind was their long-term thinking. They do not think short-term. We think every election cycle. We think the next company outcome. They think long-term. In 1999, he was talking about GE rice crops. They patented two of them in 10 years later. And he was thinking 10 years down the road. They will think the same thing about alternative energy. I should mention one other thing, which has nothing to do with that point. When I was governor, I signed a sister state link between Queensland and South Carolina. We have a link. It's like the German link. There are two major partnerships between South Carolina. Queensland's one and the other is the German link. Which brings me to the final point. One of the things that I'm trying to do now in my part-time relationship with Clemson is to encourage partnerships. Clemson and the University of Queensland, which is one of our big universities, has just signed a research partnership in developing biofuels, ethanol this time. Carmelina, I mentioned before, is not an ethanol, but this is an ethanol partnership. And switchgrass from South Carolina is going to be tested with sugar in a project in Queensland to see which is the best energy outcome. If that works, then you will have a South Carolina partnership based on Clemson University, which, as you know, is very good in agriculture, and they will be using that biofuel spin-off as one of the commercial outcomes. And I should finally say this. I don't know if Carmelina will grow here because Montana's a little cooler, but if Carmelina will grow here, if I was a farmer in this place, I'd be getting onto the US Navy, who I've invited to come down here and talk to Clemson, so we can plant Carmelina. You've got a customer, the US Navy, and if you can plant Carmelina, you've got a product that produces oil for their ships.
If we could kind of hybridize it with kudzu, I'm sure it'll work. Jochen, you came from Delaware to South Carolina a little more than, a year and a half ago?
A year ago.
And before that, you were in Germany. Why in the world would you bring your wife and your daughter to Columbia, South Carolina?
Well, I mean, I could argue the older you get, the warmer you like it. That's certainly one of the reasons. Now, when I came here, as you said before, I was in the faculty of University of Delaware, and before that at Purdue University. So I've lived in California, Indiana, Delaware, and now in South Carolina. And the reputation of the universities in South Carolina, both Clemson and USC, outside of the state, has always been excellent. I've known people at the University of South Carolina for 15 years. I've collaborated with them, and I have very high regards for them in terms of researchers. And I sometimes feel like this high reputation, as sad as it is mainly outside of the state. And it's internationally. They have a very good reputation. And I think we need to build on that. Right? And we underestimate the power of this reputation that the state has in terms of fundamental basic research and applied research that's going on. And certainly the COEE, or now Smart State program, is one of the strongest assets that we have. I mean, we've hired about 40 of these chairs, and if you look at the return on investment, the investment mainly came from lottery money, from the educational lottery. The program has now created about 4,700 jobs, just to follow up on Peter's statistics. And the average salary of those jobs is $63,000, which is certainly much higher than the average salary about twice.
Twice capita.
So this program has brought in about $360 million in research investments. And these are not just federal funds, but these are private investments. These are investments from companies. For example, we're setting up a program right now with BASF. BASF is the largest chemical company in the world. And we're setting up a program with them where we're going to collaborate on fuel cells with them. And another partner is the U.S. military. So we're looking at portable fuel cells to power the soldier in the future from jet fuel, which ties right into making jet fuel from biofuels. And then we take this biofuel and we try to run fuel cells off this jet fuel. And we need to develop new intellectual property for this. And we do have new innovations here. We've just had a big breakthrough. We're filing for the intellectual property, and we're now going into the second stage. I'm going up to D.C. in 2 weeks and discussing with the military where we can do the next step and how we can do the manufacturing, hopefully within the state of South Carolina for the prototypes. But this is an interesting product for the entire world. But this is the path, I think, this connection of local and global R&D that we need to go. And I think we need to realize in the state that what we have with the Smart State program, with the universities, all the global connections we have, if you look at BMW and other global connections, and I think we really need to take advantage of this. And we're not advertising this as much as we could, and we're not taking advantage of it as much as we could.
Let me put an exclamation mark on this Smart State concept. Ron and his board, with their $2.5 million, they joined with $2.5 million from Santee Cooper 4 years ago, Ron, almost now, created the endowed chair that Jochen sits in now, is part of that. So you're a part of this smart state economy already. You're also doing other things. PEDCO, Palmetto Economic Development Cooperative. Talk about some successes they've had, and you'll recognize these names: Honda, Google, Walmart, Monster.com, Starbucks, Komatsu, Fruit of the Loom, Walgreens, Reliable Automatic Sprinkler, Harbor Freight Tools, Target, Dollar General, Caterpillar, all within the last decade or so, all within cooperative service territory. Cooperatives landed almost 95% of the distribution facilities in the state over the last decade. Talk about the investment they've made. Since 1996, cooperatives through their RDA funds have invested a little over $51 million in economic development. Our funding for 2010 was $4.1 million. Toy, you in the room? Red Leg Loans. They do amazing things, don't they, to attract people. Toy's had such success with investment there, industrial investment there in his park. He's had to have a Red Leg Loan this year for a hotel, for folks to have a place to stay when they come down there and work in their corporate headquarters. Next steps for cooperatives, Bobby. What do we do next to help with industrial development? I've shared a little bit with you about the tools we've got to work with. We've got PEDCO. They work hard. We've got these dollars for RDA. How do we use them intelligently? How do we work better with you? How can we partner with you in the Department of Commerce over the next decade?
I think that one of the key things is something that's endemic to the co-ops, and that's managing cost. South Carolina has, on average, about a 15% advantage in electricity cost over our neighboring states, and the co-ops play a huge role in that. Anecdotally, I might add that when we were setting up BMW, while I was certainly aware that we would probably end up being serviced in our territory by a large stock-owned company that everybody knows, my dear friends at Lawrence made a great bid on it that certainly caused that stock-owned company to have to go a little lower, and I was very appreciative of that at the time. The utilities serve such a key role in our ability to stabilize economic development in this state. I've had the good fortune wherever I live, I seem to be on a co-op. My home in Greenville is at Lawrence, and my home in Fairfield is at Fairfield Co-op. I've got great
Which one's a better co-op, Bobby, do you think?
I'm living in Fairfield now, and I will tell you that since I live right down the road from Bill's assistant. My power's really good.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate all that Beth does to make sure I have power. At any rate, one of the key things for business when they come into a state is stable fixed costs that they can predict. Good tax rates, which the co-ops help keep the counties that they're in, keep an eye on the ball, and that is we need to have good low tax rates. Manufacturers are looking for places where they can invest, where they can have predictable costs, particularly international companies that are trying to stabilize their fixed costs and be able to predict them over a period of time. So co-ops play an important jawboning role in all of the counties. You're key players in your counties, and you have access to all your local politicians. And it's vitally important that we have good inventory and product, and you have a key impact on that. Also, to push your local officials to make sure we have all the infrastructure we need, build those inventories. I mentioned Lawrence a little while ago with ZF. The folks in Lawrence County worked for almost 8 years to get that site enabled. This will change this county forever. It was a lot of slog. The folks from the co-ops there and the Economic Development Group and the County Council worked hard for 8 years to get that site ready, and wow, did they win the prize. So this is not a short-term effort. This is a long-term effort. You will spend your entire career working to try to enable the infrastructure in your county and the role you play as a key player, a key component of that infrastructure to make sure we have reliable, good inventory that we can sell. I can't emphasize enough how important all of these cooperations are amongst the various officials in every county, and the co-ops play a key and leading role in that. You're seen as someone you have credibility with your ratepayers. When you step out and talk about how economic development is important in your county, your ratepayers listen. They trust you. You have a great relationship with your ratepayers. We should use that. There's a great deal of pride in South Carolina. The co-ops have done a lot to build that pride. We need to use that now. We need to convert that for our long term by emphasizing the importance of education. I was lucky enough to be one of the people involved in putting together the ICAR campus in the upstate. I was one of the, I sort of had the banking function there. And I'm a Carolina grad, so I wasn't the only person that they tried to attract down there. Because I did get called into the office at USC wanting to know where I needed to give them more money. They claimed it. The Smart State deal has been huge for us. BMW had committed $10 million to Smart State. And so the two endowed shares at Clemson valued, they get matched 1-for-1. So two $10 million shares there. There's a huge outcome potential here. Why do companies like BMW want to invest in South Carolina? Because South Carolina is accessible. And it's because of like the people in this room, we're a nice small state. We can solve problems. We can pick up the phone and we can resolve issues. We can be and are a leader in the eyes of people in the international community. Let me leave you with one thought. One of the things that I want to do over the next few years is change the image of South Carolina. I know a little bit about branding. I've spent a lot of time in the industry that understands branding. Everybody knows about the ultimate driving machine. Ladies and gentlemen, that's branding. When you come to South Carolina, we have a beautiful logo. I've got it here on my lapel. It's a palmetto tree and a crescent moon. It doesn't make a statement that we need it to make. And let me give you a practical problem that we have. Anytime you have someone visit you from out of state and they spend a few days with you in your community, before they leave, they look at you and say things like, wow, you know, this is so much different than I thought it would be. Everyone in this room has experienced that here in South Carolina. And what that means is exactly what Jochen said. We're seen in parts of the world totally different than we see ourselves, and that we allow others to see us. About every few months, some fool does something and we end up on the front page of a national newspaper. And what branding is the complete distillation of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's out there. We need to work a little bit on the good. The bad and the ugly are winning. We are a great state. We have great flexibility. We got great infrastructure, and we got great future, and it's on our hands, and we need to deliver for our future generations and for our kids. We need high-order manufacturing. We need stable environments. We've come through the textile debacle. By the way, in December of last year was the first time manufacturing job employment in the state turned up in 13 years. So we are turning the corner. Got a long way to go. We want to rebuild with a higher quality, sustaining manufacturing that's knowledge-based and supported in great part by our research universities. I can't emphasize that enough. And you have a leading role in your community to make sure we have the inventory and the capability to do it. Thank you.
Peter, if you could change one thing about South Carolina, what would you change?
I would change what Bobby just said. Now, bearing in mind, I first came here in 1996. I don't want to offend any of my friends, but Bobby's absolutely right. After I retired as governor, I had 3 months at USC as a visiting professor, and then my deputy talked me into spending 2 years as a trade commissioner in California for the Americas. I did that because the office had some problems and I felt I should fix it up. The image even of South Carolina in the US is nowhere near as good or as real as it is. And I absolutely enthusiastically endorse as a guest here, but as a legal resident, what Bobby said, the marketing will change and can change South Carolina's image. And that's what Smart State did in Queensland. Queensland used to be regarded as the joke of Australia. If you were in Sydney or Melbourne, and that's like being in New York or Boston, they'd always laugh at Queenslanders. You know, they were sort of like the Hicksville. We were the rednecks. They'd laugh about us when we weren't there. In fact, sadly, they laughed about us when we were there. But they don't laugh about us anymore. All the smart scientists have moved to Queensland. They've left Sydney and Melbourne, and Sydney and Melbourne hate it. All the people who are doing all the innovation are in Queensland. We've attracted people globally. The leader who heads up prostate cancer for Australia, headquarters in Brisbane, she's an American-Canadian. She was American, went to Canada, to the University of British Columbia. She's now based in Brisbane. We have the brains. They're no longer laughing anymore. But what Smart State did, it said to everybody, just as Bobby said, when you come, you've got to work out what is the image. It's a message. And when you pick it up, you go away saying, well, those people are doing smart stuff. Look at what they're doing with Boeing. Look at what they're doing. One other thing, if I could just say this, because that I think is the big thing. The other thing is, I have to say this again, investing in universities and education is really important, and getting a bipartisan commitment to it is important. We have a bipartisan commitment out at home. You would never... My successor faces an election in 7 months and she may lose. The polls are not good. I mean, I want her to win, but I think she may lose. But if she does lose, the opposition parties that will come in, who will be akin to Republicans, they will be very supportive of all the things we're doing. They will not change one bit of it, and I know because they've asked me to prepare briefings for them and to explain what we did, which of course I've done because we're non-political. The other final thing, if I could just make this point as a bit of a warning to cooperatives, and forgive me for being blunt, but you didn't ask me here because I'm good looking. You certainly didn't ask me here because I'm good looking. One of the things I think we need to be aware of is it's not just China. Germany's introduced a mandate which Jochen knows about in terms of green energy. Australia last Sunday announced a $23 a tonne carbon tax and a huge amount of investing in alternative energies. Now we're going to argue about the carbon tax. I know that's never going to happen in the US, but you are now going to get drivers for alternative energy that never existed before. The price was what always stopped alternative energies. Now you've got major economies actually investing in it. The price is getting the best it's ever been, and you will get technological breakthroughs. In terms of cooperatives, what you have to worry about is China going to develop a technology that you may then have to buy? And you'll find the model of generating energy will be slightly different. I privatised the retailers in Queensland because we had government-owned ones, and I felt we still own the generators, but the retailers are privately owned. I did that so that there was more competition. But one of the problems is what we're finding is instead of it being a mass distribution of electricity, you'll find that the model is changing so that you'll get people with a solar power unit on their house. They'll want to sell some of that surplus back into the grid. We've got our sugar refineries with biomass. They want to sell back into the grid. What I'm trying to say to you is 20 years' time, the model of electricity distribution could well be very different to what it is now, and that could directly affect the co-ops. That's my final point.
We're counting on it. We're counting on it being different, and we're counting on being better than anybody else. I think everybody in this room is here. My good friend Linda Bramlett calls this training. Is that right, Linda? You here with us this morning? We're learning. We're learning how to do it better. Jochen, what a great segue for you. We've invested $2.5 million in you and your endowed chair. We want to sell technology to the Chinese that you developed under your chair for the strategic advances or strategic approaches to the generation of electricity. What's your first breakthrough invention going to be for us? Predict. Where are we going?
The first breakthrough invention I already talked about. It's happening right now. And it's happening in running fuel cells, so generating electricity on a local scale from jet fuel. The reason why we're doing this is because if you look at Afghanistan, for example, jet fuel is abundant. It's easier for them to have access to jet fuel than water. The military, for example, doesn't allow us to put water in the system, but they allow us to put jet fuel in as much as we want to. So this is a technology that we're developing. This is a technology that we're starting to do scale up. In fact, tomorrow afternoon, I will have a conference call with 2 different companies that are interested in taking this technology, scaling it up, and then hopefully going to do manufacturing in the Columbia area. That's our ultimate goal. But I think really there's a bigger picture, and coming back to what you said, the trust that the people have here in the co-ops is very high, and I hear that. I hear that from my technician. She lives in a co-op serviced area, and she speaks very highly of the co-ops. And what I've also seen is that a lot of people are very forward-thinking here. I enjoy my conversations with Ron Calcaterra, for example. I mean, he has some great ideas about taking land that you have and maybe produce electricity from that, shaving off the power peaks that are there. So my challenge really is, can the co-ops help to go maybe to this model of decentralized electricity production? Can you be the leaders? This will happen. My parents have solar panels on their house.
They also pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, though.
Exactly. But at some point, we will have tremendous changes. Maybe not in our lifetime, but my daughter is 10. She will see huge changes. I think she will see crude oil go away. And this is an opportunity. I don't think we need to be scared of it. A lot of people are scared of it, that they can't do what they're doing right now the same way. But I think we need to embrace that, and it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think the co-ops really can be the leader here, and try to make people understand that our world will change. The energy landscape will change, and we need to take that as an opportunity and not as something we need to be scared of.
I appreciate the panel being here today. It's hope that we have gotten some ideas to go back to our local cooperatives. We serve 70% of the state's landmass, Peter. 1.5 million South Carolinians. We're where the state's growing. I appreciate you giving us some ideas, you and the other panel members today, about how to grow better, smarter, and have a smarter state. Thank you. Join me in thanking them.